Hello everyone. So I wanted to today have a look at who we should pick for the Ashes test, whether we should stay with Scott Boland or go back to Josh Hazelwood. So Josh Hazelwood was only out because of injury, otherwise he would have been a walk-up start, he would have been ahead of Boland. And you come back from injury, you expect to go back into the side as long as you're properly fit. That's what happens. It shouldn't matter how well your replacement went. You're the incumbent. And the other thing is, Josh Hazelwood is a very good bowler who has consistently ranked in the top 10 in all three international formats. Now, at the moment, I think he's about 13th in tests, but he's still right up there. I believe he's number one in ODIs maybe, but he's certainly up there. And T20s, he's very close to the top spot. So at first class level, average is 24.84 I believe. Very consistent performer, good day in, day out. Now Scott Boland in comparison, yes, he has a test bowling average of 10.3 I believe at the moment, but that's only after 5 tests, and we know that people can have good records early on and it just doesn't stay. They just happen to be against easy opponents or have a bit of luck or whatever. I mean, not that England and South Africa are easy opponents, but they're all home tests. So he hasn't had to have his average completely destroyed by playing, in India or something like that. So it's not necessarily the same thing. And the other thing with Scott Boland is that he has played internationals in the other two formats before, and he's done really badly. His ODI and T20I records are appalling, which suggests he's not consistent at all. In fact, he wasn't meant to be playing for Australia, except that last year I can't remember who was injured, but they just went, oh look, it's at the MCG, we know that Boland does well at the MCG, so we'll play him. And he ended up, his first innings only got 1 wicket, I think it was 1 for 48, which wasn't terrible, but if he'd got 1 for 48 in both innings, we would have thought, oh okay, that's about what we thought he'd get. And he would have been given 1 test and then that's it. And instead he got 6 for 7 in the second innings. And look, I didn't think that it was match winning because Australia were already winning the match. Australia ended up winning the match by an innings. And I think it was something like England got 180, we got 260. And then in the second innings, England had already lost a couple of early wickets and were at risk of, not putting a competitive total in. And instead he came in and took 6 for 7. And instead of England having maybe a 6 or 7 wicket loss, they crumbled to an innings loss. So it was really only the margin of victory that changed. It wasn't a match-winning effort. It was more of a change the margin effort. It was. I mean, people talk about easy wickets and hard wickets. These were easy wickets. These were not. And a lot of people do look at those figures and they sort of forget the context. And that's the thing, though. But it gets a bit of confidence going. Because once you get that and you say, oh, I'm a bowler with a single-digit bowling average, it sort of gets into your head and you sort of go, oh, well, actually, I'm better than you guys that average 22. I'm averaging 9. I'm averaging 7. And now he's averaging 10. And he just keeps thinking that he's as good as that. And I remember Brett Lee started off in a similar way, and I think he was averaging about 16 after about 5 or 6 tests. And at that stage, he was bowling like he was the best bowler in the world. But then, of course, later on, he finished still a pretty good bowler, but he averaged more like 30 at the end. And, as you progress, it can get into your head. It can sort of convince you that you're a good player or better than you really are because of your average. Sometimes those numbers can get into your head. And that's it. So, of course, we know that Vernon Philander from South Africa started off his test career with an amazing record for quite a long time. And even though his ODI and T20 records were pretty average. And he was an all-rounder who still had a test bowling average that was phenomenal to start with. I think he was averaging like 12 and 14 and stuff for quite some time, but then eventually got found out a bit, and once his average went over 20, which is still pretty good, 21 and such, he stopped being a good bowler. In fact, even on the progression, he went from 14 to 20. He was terrible, and that's the thing. It gets into your head. So we might. What would we expect long term? Would we expect Boland to have a long term bowling average of 10.3? No. But what would we expect long term? Well, Boland's bowling average is actually pretty similar to Hazelwood's. So Boland actually averages slightly better in first class cricket, 24.48, compared to Hazelwood's 24.84. So with that in mind, you might say, well, he'll probably end up with a record similar to Hazelwood's, except that he's actually older than Hazelwood. I think he is anyway. I think it's 33 to 31. And he might end up with a better record because, well, he's probably only playing at the peak of his career, or when he's already got that experience going. So, I mean, a bit like Michael Hussey when he played, and he was already 31 when he got his debut and ended up with a really good record. There's been a few players that have come in later on in their careers, ended up with amazing records because, you know, they didn't have to worry about getting used to things when they were still younger. So, I don't know, it's a tough decision. Do you leave out, I mean, it's not like we're leaving out a fringe player. It's not like the Usman Khawaja versus Marcus Harris situation when Khawaja replaced Harris. Harris was not really performing. And, you know, even though Khawaja was filling in for Head, he ended up replacing Harris because Harris was not doing very well. But that's not the case for Josh Hazelwood. In fact, if you look at the bowlers, you've got Pat Cummins and Mitchell Starc. If you're going to replace one of them, it'd probably be Mitchell Starc. And I'd imagine if you were going to have that ranking in effect, I mean, Pat Cummins is still the world's #1 ranked test bowler and he's the captain. You'd probably go Cummins, then Hazelwood, then Starc. So if you're going to bring Boland in for one of them, it'd be for Starc. Now, of course, Starc has his specialties, but it's not the MCG. But, you know, might be the SCG. And, you know, you could potentially leave Starc out, but would you leave Starc out? I don't think that's fair. But he's probably the one to go, realistically, but I think that'd be too disruptive, so I'm not going to consider leaving Starc out. You know, this is an issue. Could you leave Lyon out? I mean, we like that extra little bit of variety. Lyon's doing all right. Could go with 4 fast bowlers, potentially. It's a bit tricky, and apparently Boland does have the good record at the MCG and Hazelwood doesn't. And look, this may seem stupid to me, but the fact is, Boland would be thinking he's a 10 bowler. He's a bowler that can bowl that well, that can average under 10, bowling long spells and all this sort of stuff. And while he still thinks that way, I'm putting him ahead of Hazelwood. Once his average starts ballooning out to 15, 20, that sort of thing, yeah, drop him. But for now, I'm putting him in my side. So I'm putting Boland in there, at least for this one more test. And Hazelwood can wait till Sydney. Anyway, that's it from me. Bye-bye now.